Let's do this. Welcome one, and welcome all to The Chronic Atheist, the podcast where a manic, depressive, non-binary atheist talks about mental illness and life in general. A product of Mayhem and Foolishness Productions, this is an entirely independent effort and absolutely no professional qualifications whatsoever were involved in the creation of this podcast. Is that all the disclaimers? I think it is. Oh, except for possibly the second most important one after the no professional qualifications one, which is adults only. I use bad words. And also talk about mental illness and such things and related topics that could well be upsetting or sometimes actively triggering. So, at your own risk. Okay. Ugh. And as always, y'all, bear with me and my squeaky chair. No expense was spared in the creation of my high-tech, spare no expense, top-of-the-line recording studio. Today is Tuesday, February the 8th, 2022. I've got a lot to catch y'all up on. And it's all happened since Thursday. Okay, so around 10:30 or 11 o'clock Thursday morning, I was at work, just being at work. Doing my job, getting bored, getting paid. It's the American way. Y'all know how it is. And I stopped being able to do math. Like straight up, simple, worked out for you on the screen by the computer program math. The numbers did not compute. I was on the phone. On a recorded line. So there I was, getting more clueless by the minute. Couldn't figure out what was going on. Couldn't figure out why these mysterious glyphs of doom on the screen did not communicate meaning to me anymore. I flagged down one of my coworkers and said, Can you help me with this? Something is not right. She bailed me out and said, okay, just do me a favor and don't get back on the phone here for a second. And she vanished. Like straight up, out of sight, out of mind, walked out of my peripheral vision and ceased to exist as far as I could tell. I just stood there. I didn't know what to fucking do. An indeterminate period of time later, somebody from HR appeared at my elbow. Asked me if I was okay. I don't honestly remember what I said. She asked me if I knew who she was. I said yes, and reached deep into the ether in my brain and pulled out her name. And she kind of nodded. And she asked me to nip over to her office for a second, and I did. After a couple of false starts, it took me a while to get out of my seat, and took me a while to get out of my cubicle, and took me a while to commence to following her down the hallway. None of this is normal for me. I'm no Einstein, but I'm okay. I can follow simple instructions, and "come with me, please" is about as simple instruction-y as simple instructions get. Couldn't quite figure out how to do it. Anyway, another indeterminate period of time later, I was down in her office, couldn't figure out why. Never been in there before. She convinced me to sit down. It took me a heartbeat to figure out how chairs worked, but I got my butt in the seat. She started asking me all kinds of questions that didn't really make sense. I answered as best I could, given the fact that I couldn't really piece together what it was she was asking. She flagged down somebody else. She said, "Look, I don't know junk shop well enough to know what's normal and what's not. Is this interaction normal?" And she proceeded to interact a little bit more. The other person said, No, this is not normal. The nice lady asked me if I wanted to call an ambulance. I said ambulances are expensive. She said, "Don't you think you maybe need to go to a hospital?" I said, "Hospitals are expensive." She goes, "Is there somebody I can call for you?" I'm sort of trimming the fat off of this. Most of this was repeated multiple times between my cubicle and her office. Long story short, she finally got my wife on the phone. At this point, I'm sort of going to have to piece together for you what happened through what I've been told since then. Because I was not experiencing shared reality in a particularly thorough way. She asked me a question. The HR lady did ask me a question. Tried to get me to engage with my wife, who was on the speakerphone. It didn't really work. I couldn't really figure out what was going on. I am told that my wife asked me a question. I have no memory of this. The HR lady asked me if I knew who that was on the phone. Yes, I said. That is my wife's first name. My wife's first name works from home. For the record, I am assured that while both of those statements are true, factual, and accurate, neither one of them had particularly anything to do with the content of either of the last couple of minutes worth of questions. Okay, so they called an ambulance. Unsurprisingly, they called an ambulance. Another indeterminate period of time passed. Some ambulance people showed up with a gurney and some equipment and stuff. They proceeded to ask me questions. I am assured that I was equally as blindingly astute in my answers to their questions. They took my pulse. Don't smoke, kids. It's bad for you. They asked me more questions and did some various preliminaries. Finally convinced me it might be a good idea to go to the hospital. They weren't exactly taking no for an answer. They were very kind about it, were these medical people. Very kind, but very firm. They eventually convinced me to get on the gurney thingy and wheeled me directly the fuck out of the office into the parking lot. Me, quietly protesting all the way that I really couldn't leave. It was not time for me to go on lunch. Ambulances drive very fast. Very, very fast. And seem to drive even faster when you're facing the wrong way and lying down and confused and hooked up to machines and being asked questions, some of the words of which one understands. We rolled into what I later came to understand as I reviewed the day's events in my mind, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We eventually arrived in what I came to understand later was the hospital, where you go when you're sick, where doctors live who make you better. I didn't understand at the time that I was in the hospital. I knew I was in a place. I knew I'd never been in this place before. I could tell it was organized. That's about all I could figure out. It was very organized. It was full of a lot of people moving very quickly. A lot of them in uniforms. A lot of them looking very sad. And that's when they started asking questions in earnest. And that's when it got bizarre. Because that's when I couldn't figure out really what the questions were. There was a very pleasant but very insisting gentleman who was very invested in finding out where we were. He wouldn't stop asking me. He wouldn't ask anyone else, only me. Why he was asking me, I couldn't tell, because surely I was not the person to ask. But he kept asking me where we were. Do you know where you are? He kept saying, no. I told him over and over and over again. Finally, he asked it about the 3 squillionth time, and I finally came up with, by looking around, in a hallway. Good, he said. Do you know where you are? This went on for some time. I saw a sign on the wall that said EMS3. He wouldn't take that for an answer. Do you know how you got here? He said. They drove me, I said. Do you know where you were going? He said. I sort of scraped back through the bottom of my memory and remembered that someone had said that we should go to a hospital, and I told him that. Okay, he said. So where do you think you are? In a hospital? Good. Do you know which hospital? Somehow I had retained that we were at Hospital X on Y Street. Good, he said, and he disappeared. This went on for some time. More people with only half their face visible, more questions. And that's when I completely lost touch with reality. Because at some point along the line, I stopped being able to differentiate people. They literally, every last one of them, looked the same. I'm not talking similar. I'm not talking bipedal. I'm talking the same. Tall, sandy blonde men. medium-height women with shoulder-length, dark brown hair. They all looked the same. And I couldn't understand what they were saying. They kept... I mean, that's not strictly true, because I'm about to tell you what they were saying. From my perspective, can't possibly have fucking been what they were actually saying, though, as you'll see here in a moment. They only greeted each other one way. Well, one way with two phrasings. Always either, "Are you one of them?" or "Are you one?" The response was invariably no. The invariable second question was to look or nod or gesture at me and say, "Is he one?" The response was invariably, "We don't know yet." This went on for quite some time. And there was rapid movement, lots of wheeling around, lots of tests, lots of large, noisy machines. One very tall person who assured me that if I moved during the following test, I would die. Possibly, not certainly, but I very well could. I did not move. I did not move for some time after the test. They finally had to convince me to get up off the test bed doohickey and get onto the rolly bed again. Still, nobody told me it was okay to move, so I did so as little as physically possible. Eventually, they parked me somewhere, and everybody disappeared. And I fell into a profound depression. And eventually, at some point, realized I wasn't physically capable of holding my hand in that precise position anymore, and would just kind of have to resign myself to the possibility that I might die after all. So I moved a little bit and waited to die. And moved a little bit and waited to die. And this went on for an indeterminate period of time. Eventually, I figured out that I wasn't at least in immediate danger of death, at least not based on current experience. So I just settled in and got as comfortable as one can when parked in a hallway on a rolly bed. They did eventually find a room for me. They got me hooked up to an IV of some revoltingly yellow, sort of slimy-looking stuff. At some point, my wife got there and was very, very, very kind and reassuring. And eventually I sort of evened out. I could differentiate faces again. I could understand sentences. People were actually speaking conversations in English that made sense out of some weird sort of cult film realm. And eventually I felt fine again. Couldn't focus enough to read, mind you. Thank God for those fucking televisions in hospital rooms. If it hadn't been for the fucking Sci-Fi Channel, I don't know how I would have made it through that night. I didn't get to sleep until well after 5 in the morning. And there were pills and injections and cognition tests and all manner of delightful entertainment. Not much beyond that. Until well after noon the following day. Some sainted soul actually stayed late on a day he should have been off more than an hour before to give me one of those tests where they wire electrodes to your scalp so that the psychic machine can read your brain. That was interesting. I'd never had that one before. That glue is hard to get out of your hair. Apparently the old version of that test, they used some kind of stuff to keep the electrodes in place, and he said that you had to use, I think he said, acetone nail polish remover to get it off. But the stuff they use now comes off with soap and water, thank goodness. I learned a new word. Encephalopathy, which is a very fancy medical term that essentially means bad brain shit. It's not a condition. It's a symptom, and a very vaguely defined one at that. It refers to the altered mental state brought on by disease of, inflammation of, or injury to the brain. What exactly caused mine? We've yet to find out. I have a follow-up appointment with my neurologist a week from today. I'll keep you all apprised. I don't know if this is better or worse than the medical mystery tour of last year. Last year I was scared stupid because we had no fucking clue what was wrong with me. And as longtime listeners of the podcast know, it eventually was found out to be a very, very bad case of all things, sinusitis that was cleared out with an aggressive treatment based on, of all things, Claritin. This is not sinusitis. It also was neither a stroke nor a brain tumor. Those were very quickly ruled out with some of the giant science fiction testing machines. What it is, or was, what caused it, what could cause it again, whether or not it's likely to recur. None of these things do we as yet know. And old Junk Shop is not happy about that. But what the fuck can you do? You schedule your next appointment. You make your plan. You pray to fucking non-existent Jesus nothing happens to throw off that plan. And you wait for Tuesday. Thank you for coming. Thank you all for taking with me that delightful little trek down memory lane. thank you all for the continued watching and or listening to and or downloading of the show through the various and sundry platforms on which it is available. Whether that's here at the original home of the show on Podbean, whether that's on Spotify or Amazon Music, or through its peculiar little automated YouTube video creation interface that I don't understand, but that is so delightful and so marvelous. Thank y'all for sticking around. I hope you get something out of this show. Chronic illness can create feelings of, fairly profound feelings of isolation and loneliness. Even when you're as lucky as I am and have a pretty damn decent support system in, do we still call it meat space in real life? Whatever. But I know, as I have blundered around on the internet over the years, I've frequently found a great deal of comfort in the stories and the communities of people who also have chronic conditions. Whether they are the same conditions I have, or ones that are so alien to me I have to be forever going back to the dictionary while they talk. I'm hoping to grow a little bit of that here. Let me know if you find it helpful. You know, comments below and all that rot. At the very least, I know I'll have either something or nothing to tell y'all early to middle of next week. So, what the hell? Notifications on? How do you even notifications on with a podcast? I don't even know. Well, as we always say before we roll out of here, everybody take care and be safe. Make and keep your doctor appointments and stand against hate. Stay safe out there, y'all. We'll see you again soon.